You have 72 hours to dismantle this commercial enterprise, or I will have the city condemn this entire property. That was the first time I heard the voice that would become the soundtrack to my own personal hell. It was high-pitched, laced with a venomous self-importance that grated on the ear like sand in a gearbox. I looked up from the delicate work of rigging a miniature topsail on my model of the USS Constitution, my concentration shattered. Standing in the open doorway of my garage was a woman who could only be described as the physical embodiment of a clenched fist. She was short, stout, and dressed in a powder blue tracksuit that seemed 2 sizes too tight. Her hair was a helmet of blonde spray, and her eyes, magnified by a pair of garish glasses, were narrowed into slits of pure indignation. This, I would soon learn, was Carol, the president of our homeowners association. Before I continue, if you're a fan of seeing a bully get exactly what they deserve, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss the stories we have coming up. So, let me know in the comments, what's the most ridiculous rule you've ever had to deal with? This whole saga started because I wanted a little peace. My wife, Martha, had passed away 3 years prior, and the big family house felt less like a home and more like a museum of memories I wasn't ready to face every day. So, I sold it and bought a smaller place in the Pines, a manicured suburban enclave that promised tranquility. It was closer to my daughter, Sarah, and my 2 grandkids. My plan was simple: convert the 2-car garage into a proper workshop and spend my retirement building the intricate, museum-quality ship models that had been my lifelong passion. I was a retired structural engineer. I knew how to build things right. I spent 40 years of my life designing bridges and buildings, and for the last 15 of those years, I served on the state commission that literally wrote and updated the municipal building codes. I didn't just know the rules, I had drafted half of them. This workshop was my sanctuary, built to be safer and more structurally sound than the house it was attached to. I had just laid out the tools for the day when Carol made her grand entrance. I blinked, trying to process her declaration. Commercial enterprise? I asked, my voice calm. I gestured around the workshop. This is a hobby. I'm retired. She sniffed, a sound like a leaky faucet. I saw the lumber delivery yesterday. That's a commercial quantity of material. This is a residential neighborhood, Mr. Mark, I supplied. And it was a special order of basswood and mahogany. For my models, I pointed to the half-finished frigate on my workbench. Like this one. She barely glanced at it. Her eyes were scanning my workshop, cataloging every perceived violation. My pegboard of neatly organized tools, my ventilation system, the fire-rated cabinet where I kept my stains and varnishes. This is an unapproved structural modification, she declared, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the insulated walls. And that ventilation fan is a violation of aesthetic standards. I had to stop myself from laughing. The fan was a small, quiet exhaust port, painted to match the exterior trim. You couldn't see it from the street. You'd have to be standing on my driveway, actively looking for something to complain about. Which, apparently, she was. I assure you, I said, keeping my tone even, everything here is well within city and state building codes. In fact, it exceeds them. I don't care about city codes, she snapped. I care about the HOA covenants. And the covenants say no businesses, no nuisances, and no unsightly modifications. You, sir, are 3 for 3 inch. She produced a clipboard from under her arm, a weapon she clearly wielded with practiced ease. Here is your first official warning. You have 72 hours. She slapped a piece of paper onto my workbench, dangerously close to a delicate piece of rigging. I picked it up. It was a formal violation notice, citing bylaws I'd never heard of, for transgressions that were patently absurd. I took a deep breath. I was new here. I didn't want to make waves. I just wanted to build my ships. All right, I said, folding the paper. I'll review the covenants. A smug little smile played on her lips. See that you do. She turned on her heel and marched back to the golf cart she used to patrol her little kingdom, a chariot for a petty tyrant. That was the beginning. I tried to be reasonable. I read the covenants, all 200 pages of them. They were dense, filled with legalese and ambiguous phrasing, but I found nothing that explicitly forbade a hobby workshop. I wrote a polite, detailed letter to the HOA board, explaining my position and citing the specific sections of the bylaws that supported my right to use my garage for personal recreation. I even included a copy of the permit I'd pulled for the electrical work, just to show I did things by the book. Her response was to escalate. A week later, I received a second notice, this time with a $200 fine. The new violation: improper storage of industrial materials, referring to the neat stack of lumber against the back wall of my own garage. The notice was accompanied by a grainy photo, clearly taken by her peering through my side window. The invasion of privacy was galling, but I still tried to play the game. I paid the fine, foolishly thinking it would appease her. Of course, it only emboldened her. It was like feeding a shark, it just made it want more. The fines started coming weekly. My grass was a quarter-inch too high. A garden gnome my granddaughter had given me was an unapproved lawn ornament. The oil stain on my driveway, no bigger than a quarter, was a hazardous chemical spill. Each notice was more ridiculous than the last. She was building a case, brick by brick, painting me as a problem resident. My neighbors were sympathetic but cowed. "That's just Carol," one of them, a timid man named George, told me over the fence. "She gets a bug in her bonnet about someone and doesn't let go. It's easier to just do what she says." But I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was a quiet, respectful homeowner who just wanted to be left alone. Her campaign of harassment was a slow drip poison, turning my peaceful retirement into a constant state of low-grade anxiety. Every time I heard the hum of her golf cart, my stomach would clench. My sanctuary had become a battleground. Still, I held back. I documented everything, every notice, every fine, every interaction. I kept a log. As an engineer, documentation was second nature to me. But I didn't act. I told myself it was just a neighborhood squabble, that it would eventually blow over. I was wrong. I had severely underestimated the depths of her malice. The turning point came on a bright Saturday afternoon. Sarah had brought my grandkids, Lily and Tom, over for a visit. I was showing them how to use a small hand plane to shape a piece of scrap wood in the workshop. The big garage door was open, letting in the sunlight. They were laughing, their small hands carefully guiding the tool with mine. It was a perfect moment. And then, Carol's shadow fell across the doorway. "What is going on in here?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Lily, who was only 6, flinched and hid behind my leg. Tom, a brave 8-year-old, just stared. "We're making a toy boat, Carol," I said, my voice tight. "Is there a problem?" "A problem?" She scoffed, her eyes sweeping over the scene with disgust. "You're running a sweatshop with child labor. This is an industrial zone. Look at this dust. These tools. It's incredibly dangerous. You are endangering these children." That was it. The line. My patience, which I had cultivated and guarded for months, finally snapped. It cracked like cheap concrete under a sledgehammer. "They are my grandchildren," I said, my voice dropping to a low, cold register I hadn't used in years. "And this is my home. You are trespassing. Get off my property. Now." For the first time, she looked taken aback. She was used to meek compliance, not direct confrontation. But she recovered quickly, her face hardening into a mask of righteous fury. "I am the president of this association," she spat. "I can go wherever I want to ensure compliance with the rules. And I am reporting this to Child Protective Services. We'll see how you like explaining your dangerous, illegal factory to them." She spun around and stomped back to her golf cart, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Sarah rushed out from the house, having heard the commotion. "Dad, what was that? Who was that horrible woman?" I looked at my grandchildren's frightened faces. Lily was on the verge of tears. Tom was trying to look tough, but his bottom lip was trembling. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The peace-seeking retiree was gone, replaced by the men who had spent a lifetime solving problems. And Carol had just become a problem I was going to solve. Permanently. She had threatened my family. She had tried to turn my greatest joy, sharing my craft with my grandkids, into something ugly and sinister. She had weaponized the safety of my own flesh and blood against me. The war was on. And she had no idea who she was fighting. She thought she was swatting at a fly. She was about to find out she'd kicked a hornet's nest. That night, after Sarah and the kids had gone home, I sat in my workshop, the half-finished model of the Constitution mocking me with its silent grace. I had sought peace, but Carol had brought war to my doorstep. Fine. I would give her a war she would never forget. My first move wasn't aggressive. It was strategic. I pulled out my laptop and began to dig. My entire career was built on research, on understanding the intricate web of rules, regulations, and laws that govern the physical world. The HOA was just another structure, and every structure has a blueprint. Every structure has a point of failure. I started with the documents she loved to quote, the HOA covenants. I downloaded them from the county website, along with the original plat maps for the Pines development, filed in 1988. I spent hours reading, cross-referencing, and making notes. The language was deliberately obtuse, designed to intimidate the average homeowner. But to me, it was just another technical document. Then I expanded my search. I pulled the town's zoning ordinances, the county's land use regulations, and the state statutes governing homeowners associations. I was building a complete schematic of the legal framework Carol operated within. Or, as I was beginning to suspect, the framework she operated outside of. A few days later, my first discovery came. It was small, but significant. According to state law, any amendments to an HOA's covenants had to be filed with the county clerk's office within 30 days of being passed. I found the original 1988 covenants. Then I found a series of amendments from 2005. But the specific, draconian rules Carol was citing against me, the ones about commercial activity and aesthetic modifications, were from a set of amendments supposedly passed in 2017. I searched the county records. There was no record of them. They had never been legally filed. They were, in effect, completely unenforceable. She was wielding a sword that had no edge. It was a bluff, and for years, everyone in the neighborhood had been folding. This was good, but it wasn't enough. Proving her rules were invalid would stop the harassment against me, but it wouldn't remove her from power. It wouldn't address the root of the problem. I needed more. I needed a critical structural flaw. My investigation continued. I started looking into the HOA's finances. The annual budgets were posted on a clunky, password-protected website for residents. I logged in and downloaded everything they had. The numbers were a mess. Vague line items for landscaping, community maintenance, and legal fees accounted for nearly 60% of the annual budget. There were no detailed invoices, no competitive bids. Just lump sum payments to a handful of companies. One company name stuck out, Prestige Property Solutions. They handled landscaping, snow removal, and general repairs. Their invoices were consistently the largest single expense for the HOA, month after month. The payments were all signed off by one person, Carol. A quick search of the state's business registry told me everything I needed to know. Prestige Property Solutions was an LLC. The registered agent and sole proprietor, Carol's husband. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just petty tyranny anymore. This was a grift. She wasn't just a power-hungry shrew, she was a thief, using the HOA as her personal piggy bank. She and her husband were fleecing their neighbors, padding invoices, and awarding no-bid contracts to themselves. Her obsessive enforcement of the rules wasn't about maintaining property values, it was about maintaining control. She created a climate of fear to ensure no one would ever dare to look too closely at the books. But I still needed something bigger. Something undeniable and public. Something that couldn't be swept under the rug as a mere conflict of interest. I found it when I was looking at the budget for the previous year. There was a massive one-time expense, a special assessment of over $200,000, for slope stabilization and retaining wall construction, at the back of the community near the creek. I remembered the wall. It was a huge, ugly thing made of precast concrete blocks, built to shore up the hillside behind the last row of houses. There had been a lot of grumbling about the cost, but Carol had pushed it through, citing a critical engineering report that warned of an imminent landslide risk. An engineering report. Now we were on my turf. The next morning, I took a walk. I brought a small toolkit with me, a tape measure, a geologist's hammer, a high-resolution digital camera, and a laser level. I looked like a harmless old man out for a stroll. When I reached the retaining wall, I got to work. It didn't take an expert to see the problems. I could spot them from 50 yards away. The wall had been built without proper drainage. There were no weep holes to relieve the hydrostatic pressure from the groundwater in the hillside. I could already see dark, damp patches staining the concrete, a sure sign of water building up behind it. I got closer. There were visible cracks, stress fractures spiderwebbing out from the joints between the blocks. I used my hammer to tap on the concrete. Instead of the solid ping of high-density, properly cured material, I heard a dull, crumbly thud. Substandard material. They had used the cheap stuff. I took out my laser level. The wall wasn't plumb. It was already leaning, bulging outward in the middle by a few degrees. It wasn't a lot, but for a wall that was supposed to be holding back thousands of tons of saturated earth, it was a death sentence. This wall wasn't just a waste of money. It was a catastrophe in waiting. With the first heavy spring rain, the pressure would build, and the whole thing would fail. It would be a mudslide, and it would take out the backyards of at least 3 houses. Carol hadn't just cheated her neighbors. She had endangered them. Her greed had created a ticking time bomb right in the heart of the community she claimed to be protecting. I spent an hour documenting everything. I took hundreds of photos, measured every crack, and recorded all the inclination data. I went home and spent the rest of the day doing what I did best. I wrote an engineering report. My report was a thing of beauty. It was cold, clinical, and utterly damning. I ran soil pressure calculations, fluid dynamic models, and material stress analyses. I cited the specific sections of the state and national building codes that the wall violated, codes that I had helped write. My conclusion was stark: the retaining wall was structurally unsound, improperly designed, and constructed with inferior materials. It posed a significant and immediate threat to life and property. It required immediate condemnation and replacement. Section. Now I had my weapon. It was time to formulate a plan of attack. Phase 1 was complete: investigation and evidence gathering. Phase 2 would be setting the trap. My strategy wasn't going to be a direct assault. A cornered animal is a dangerous one. I needed to give Carol enough rope to hang herself. I needed to bait her into making her fatal error on the record. I started by installing a few discrete security cameras around my property. Small, motion-activated ones that blended into the soffits of my house. One covered my driveway and the front of my workshop, another my side yard, and a third pointed directly at my front door. I wanted every one of her little snooping expeditions and drive-by glares documented. Next, I drafted a letter. Not to Carol, but to the entire HOA board. I made it sound like the concerned, if slightly pedantic, ramblings of a retired engineer. I kept my tone respectful and non-confrontational. Dear board members, it began, as a resident with a background in structural engineering, I have recently observed some minor signs of spalling and efflorescence on the community retaining wall near the creek. While likely just cosmetic, I would feel more at ease if the board could provide me with a copy of the final inspection report and the soil analysis that was conducted prior to construction. I'm sure everything is in order, but for my own peace of mind, I would appreciate the chance to review the documentation. Thank you for your time. It was a masterpiece of understated menace. I wasn't accusing anyone of anything. I was just a helpful old man asking to see the paperwork. Paperwork I knew for a fact either didn't exist or was fraudulent. I sent the email and copied the town's planning and zoning department. That last part was key. It put them on notice and created an official record of my inquiry. Now, her response wouldn't just be to me, it would be part of a public file. The trap was set. Now, I waited. It took 4 days for the bait to be taken. The response didn't come from the board. It came directly from Carol, and her email was dripping with condescension. Mr. Mark, she wrote, I am in receipt of your concerns. Rest assured, the board had the retaining wall project fully vetted by certified professionals. We do not make a habit of distributing sensitive engineering documents to residents, especially those with a known history of filing frivolous complaints. However, to put your peace of mind at ease, I have attached the summary page of the final report from our engineers at Structural Solutions Incorporated. As you can see, the wall was deemed structurally sound and exceeding all state and local requirements. I trust this closes the matter. I opened the attachment. It was a single-page PDF, a letterhead from a company I'd never heard of, with a few paragraphs of technical jargon and a final, stamped signature from a lead engineer. The whole thing screamed fake. The formatting was off, the language was just a little too vague, and the engineer's stamp looked like a low-resolution JPEG. She had taken the bait more spectacularly than I could have hoped. She didn't just lie, she had fabricated evidence. She had committed fraud and forgery and emailed it not just to me, but to a government office. This was the critical error I had been waiting for. I did a quick search for Structural Solutions Incorporated. The company didn't exist. I searched the state's professional engineering license database for the name on the stamp. The license number was invalid. She had invented a company and a professional engineer out of thin air. It was amateurish. It was arrogant. It was perfect. Now it was time for the next phase, the first public reveal. The annual HOA meeting was in 2 weeks. It was usually a sleepy affair, with only a handful of residents showing up to listen to Carol drone on about lawn maintenance. This year, I was going to make it interesting. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing. I refined my engineering report, adding an appendix that detailed why the document Carol had sent me was a forgery. I put together a simple, clear PowerPoint presentation, the kind I used to give at board meetings and public hearings. It was filled with pictures, diagrams, and easy-to-understand explanations of hydrostatic pressure and tensile strength. I wasn't going to talk down to my neighbors, I was going to educate them. I was going to show them, with cold, hard facts, how Carol had not only stolen their money but put their homes at risk. The night of the meeting arrived. The community clubhouse was half full, about 30 residents scattered in folding chairs. Carol was at the front, flanked by the 2 other board members, a nervous-looking accountant and a woman who seemed completely disengaged. Carol ran through the agenda with smug efficiency. The budget report, the landscaping committee update, the reminder about trash can placement. It was excruciatingly dull. Finally, she got to the new business portion of the meeting. "Does anyone have any new business to bring before the board?" she asked, her eyes scanning the room, daring anyone to speak. I raised my hand. "I do." A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. "Mr. Mark." "Of course. Please keep it brief. We have important matters to discuss." I walked to the front of the room and connected my laptop to the projector. "Thank you, Carol. This won't take long." My first slide was a beautiful, high-resolution photo of the retaining wall, with the spiderweb of cracks clearly visible. A low murmur went through the room. "My name is Mark, and I live on Oak Lane," I began, my voice calm and steady. "As some of you may know, my professional background is in structural engineering. For the last 2 weeks, at my own expense, I have been conducting a preliminary safety assessment of the community retaining wall." Carol stood up. "This is out of order. This is not on the agenda. This is a private matter being handled by the board. I believe the potential failure of a $200,000 structure that could cause a landslide into 3 of our homes is very much the community's business," I said, not taking my eyes off the audience. I clicked to the next slide, which showed the wall's outward bulge, illustrated with clear red lines from my laser-level data. The wall, as it was constructed, is in violation of at least 12 different state and municipal building codes, I continued, my voice resonating with the authority of my profession. It lacks proper drainage, is built with substandard materials, and is already showing signs of imminent structural failure. People were sitting up now, whispering to each other. I saw my neighbor George, his eyes wide. I then clicked to the next slide. It was a side-by-side comparison. On the left was the forged document Carol had sent me. On the right was a screenshot of the state licensing database showing the engineer didn't exist. When I raised these concerns with the board, I said, finally turning to look directly at Carol, I was provided with this document, supposedly from an engineering firm called Structural Solutions Incorporated. However, according to state records, no such firm exists. And the licensed engineer who supposedly signed this report, his license number is invalid. The room fell silent. You could hear a pin drop. All eyes were on Carol. Her face was a mottled canvas of red and white. She looked from me to the screen, then to the faces of her neighbors. For a moment, she seemed speechless. But only for a moment. This is a slanderous lie, she shrieked, finding her voice. This man is a known troublemaker. He's been harassing the board for months because he wants to run an illegal factory out of his garage. He's doctoring these photos. He's a liar. Her denial was too loud, too hysterical. It reeked of panic. I remained calm. I'm not asking you to take my word for it, I said to the audience. I'm simply asking the board to authorize a formal, independent inspection of the wall by a licensed and bonded engineering firm. A firm that actually exists. A man in the front row stood up. I think that's a reasonable request. I live on Creekwood Drive. That wall is right behind my house. Another voice chimed in. Yeah, we all paid for that wall. We deserve to know it's safe. The tide was turning. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and they were taking root in the fertile ground of years of resentment. Carol saw her power slipping away, and she lost it. This meeting is over, she screeched, banging a gavel on the table. Over. Any further discussion is out of order. But no one was listening to her anymore. They were all talking at once, looking at me, asking questions. I had cracked her foundation. I had shown them that the Empress had no clothes. She hadn't been defeated yet, but she had lost her most valuable asset, her aura of untouchable authority. She stood there, trembling with rage, her face a mask of fury. She shot me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. A look that promised retribution. The trap had been sprung, and the animal was now cornered. I knew this was far from over. Her next move would be desperate. And it would be vicious. I was ready. Carol's retaliation was swift and brutal. She didn't bother with HOA violation notices anymore. She went for the jugular. 2 days after the meeting, a squad car pulled up in front of my house. 2 police officers got out and walked up my driveway. I met them at the door, my heart pounding a little faster despite myself. Can I help you, officers? Sir, we've received a complaint from one of your neighbors, the older officer said, his face unreadable. A Ms. Carol Peters. She claims you threatened her life at a community meeting 2 nights ago. I almost laughed at the sheer audacity. She's lying, I said simply. I have the entire meeting on video. Several other residents were recording it as well. I had, of course, set my phone to record audio of the entire meeting. And my little security camera on the garage had captured Carol's enraged face as she stormed out of the clubhouse. The officer seemed to relax slightly. She also filed a request for a temporary restraining order, alleging a pattern of harassment. Officers, she is the one who has been harassing me for months, I said, keeping my voice level. I have a file of dozens of frivolous violation notices, photos of her trespassing on my property, and a log of every interaction. She is retaliating because I exposed potential fraud and a serious public safety issue at our HOA meeting. They listened patiently. I could tell they had dealt with this kind of neighborhood drama before. Do you have that video? The younger one asked. I do. And I'm happy to provide a copy. They took my statement, reviewed my log, and left with a copy of the video file. The restraining order was dead on arrival, and the false police report only added another potential charge to Carol's growing list. But her attack had its intended effect. Whispers started circulating. The neighborhood Facebook group, which she moderated with an iron fist, was suddenly filled with anonymous-sounding posts about a disruptive new resident who was endangering the community and making baseless accusations to avoid paying his fines. She was trying to poison the well, to paint me as the villain before the truth about the retaining wall could gain traction. She even stooped to calling my daughter, Sarah. She left a rambling, unhinged voicemail, accusing me of being senile and a danger to my own grandchildren, warning Sarah to keep them away from that man and his toxic workshop. That was a mistake. Sarah, who had been supportive but on the sidelines, was now furious. The mama bear had been poked. Dad, she said, her voice shaking with anger, that's it. We are ending this. What do you need? What I needed was the final piece of the puzzle. I had engineering reports and evidence of forgery. I had a clear case for financial misconduct with her husband's company. But to truly bury her, I needed to prove intent. I needed a witness. I needed a whistleblower. And as if on cue, one fell right into my lap. My phone rang a few days later. It was an unknown number. "Is this Mark?" a man's voice asked, low and nervous. "It is." "Who's this?" "You don't know me." "My name is Frank. I own a small construction company. I'm the one who built that retaining wall." I sat down. "Go on." "Look, I heard about what happened at that HOA meeting," he said, his words rushed. "I know that wall is a piece of junk. Carol, she made me cut corners. She specified the cheapest materials, refused to pay for a proper drainage system, and had me backfill with uncompacted soil. I told her it wouldn't hold. She told me to just build it and shut up." "Why are you telling me this now, Frank?" I asked, my pen already scribbling notes. "Because she still owes me the final payment. $30,000. Now that you're making waves, she's refusing to pay, claiming my work was shoddy. Can you believe the nerve? She's trying to blame me for the mess she created. And I've got a family to feed." This was it. The smoking gun. "Frank," I said, my voice calm and reassuring. "Do you have any of this in writing? Emails? Text messages? A contract?" There was a pause. "I do," he said. "I have emails where she explicitly tells me to use the cheaper blocks to maximize the budget surplus. I've got the original quote I gave her for the proper build, and the revised, cheaper one she made me sign." "Frank," I said slowly, "you are in a bit of trouble yourself. You knowingly constructed a dangerous, non-compliant structure. But you have a chance to make it right. If you cooperate, if you provide me with those documents, I can make sure the authorities know that you were acting under duress and are now helping to expose the fraud. It's your best chance to avoid liability." He was quiet for a long moment. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. "Meet me tomorrow morning," he finally said. "Coffee shop on the corner of Main and 4th. I'll bring everything." The next day, Frank handed me a manila folder. It was all there. A chain of emails that laid out the entire conspiracy in black and white. Carol, in her own words, directing the contractor to cut corners to save money that was clearly being funneled into her husband's company for project management fees. It was a clear-cut case of embezzlement, fraud, and reckless endangerment. I now had an ironclad case. It was time to stop playing with the HOA and the town zoning board. It was time to involve higher authorities. I spent the next 2 days compiling my evidence into a single, comprehensive package. I organized it like a legal brief. I started with a summary of events, then presented the evidence in chronological order: the harassment campaign, my initial investigation, the fraudulent engineering report, my own certified assessment of the wall's structural flaws, the evidence of financial malfeasance with her husband's company, and finally, the sworn affidavit and supporting emails from Frank, the contractor. My complete file was over 100 pages long. It was methodical, detailed, and undeniable. I didn't go to the local police. I went bigger. I made an appointment with the Economic Crimes Unit of the County District Attorney's Office. I sat across from a sharp, no-nonsense investigator named Detective Miller. He listened intently for nearly an hour as I walked him through the entire story, presenting each piece of evidence as I went. I didn't editorialize. I just stated the facts. When I was done, he leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle. "Mr. Mark," he said, "you've done 90% of my job for me. This is one of the most well-documented civilian cases I've ever seen." He picked up the folder. "We're going to open a formal investigation immediately. Given the public safety risk from that wall, we're going to fast-track this. I want you to do one thing for me: don't say a word about this to anyone. Let her think she's won. Let her get comfortable." I agreed. For the next week, I laid low. I kept my garage door closed. I ignored the nasty looks. I let her think her campaign of intimidation had worked. It was the hardest part of the whole process, but I knew it was necessary. Then, the call came from Miller. "We're ready to move," he said. "We've subpoenaed the HOA's bank records. It's all there, just like you said. The money trail is a highway leading straight to her and her husband. We're also getting a court order to have the state's top geological engineer inspect that wall tomorrow." He continued, "We think the best way to handle this is with a clean sweep. We'd like to make the arrest in a public setting, to minimize any chance of her destroying evidence or trying to flee. And frankly, to send a message." He paused. "There's an emergency HOA meeting she's called for tomorrow night, isn't there? The agenda says it's to vote on levying a special assessment against your property and to remove you from the community." A slow smile spread across my face. "Yes, there is." "Perfect," Miller said. "We'll be there. Just act normal. Let her have her say. We'll handle the rest." The stage was set for the final act. Carol had called a public meeting to perform my execution. She had no idea she was actually attending her own funeral. The community clubhouse was packed. Word had spread about the drama, and this time, nearly everyone had turned out. The air was thick with tension. I saw friends of Carol's on one side, glaring at me. On the other side, I saw my neighbor George and the people who lived near the retaining wall, their faces etched with worry. I took a seat in the back row with Sarah, who had insisted on coming to support me. Carol stood at the podium, beaming. She looked triumphant, like a queen who had finally quashed a rebellion. She banged the gavel. "Welcome," she began, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "We have called this emergency meeting to address a grave issue that threatens the peace and financial stability of our community." Her eyes found me in the back. "It has come to the board's attention that one of our residents, Mr. Mark, has engaged in a campaign of slander and misinformation, all while running an illegal commercial business from his property and making unapproved, dangerous modifications to his home." She went on for 10 minutes, listing all my supposed crimes. The gnome, the lumber, the workshop. It was her greatest hits album of petty tyranny. She was building to her grand finale. "Therefore," she announced, her voice swelling with authority, "the board proposes 2 motions. First, to levy a special assessment of $50,000 against Mr. Mark's property to cover the legal fees and property value losses he has caused. Second, to begin legal proceedings to have him declared a nuisance and forcibly removed from the Pines." A gasp went through the room. This was an escalation no one had expected. "All in favor," she crowed, raising her own hand. Her 2 board cronies shot their hands up immediately. A few of her supporters followed suit. Before she could continue, a calm, authoritative voice cut through the room. "Not so fast." Detective Miller and another plainclothes officer stepped in from the back hallway. They were flanked by 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies. The room fell into a stunned silence. "Who are you?" Carol demanded, her face paling. "This is a private meeting." "Detective Miller, County DA's office," he said, flashing his badge. "And this is now an official investigation." He walked to the front of the room. "Carol Peters, you have the right to remain silent." Carol's jaw dropped. She stared at him, then at me, her mind clearly struggling to process what was happening. "What is this?" "This is his doing," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He's a criminal. Arrest him." Miller ignored her. He turned to face the assembled residents. "For the past 2 weeks, my office has been investigating the financial activities of your HOA board, specifically concerning the construction of the retaining wall at the back of this community." He gestured to me. "Thanks to the detailed evidence provided by your neighbor, Mr. Mark, and the full cooperation of the contractor involved, we have uncovered a systematic scheme of embezzlement, wire fraud, and forgery." He held up a file. "We have bank records showing over $70,000 in HOA funds being funneled through shell payments to a company owned by Carol's husband. We have emails, written by Carol herself, directing the contractor to use substandard materials to create that fraudulent surplus. And we have a report from the state's chief engineer, who inspected the wall this afternoon. His official conclusion is that the wall is in a state of critical and imminent failure, and poses a direct threat to the homes below it." A wave of shocked and angry murmurs swept through the crowd. The people who lived on Creekwood Drive looked horrified. Carol began to hyperventilate. "Lies. These are all lies. Forged emails. He's a monster. He's trying to ruin me." That's when I stood up and walked to the front. Miller nodded at me. I turned on the projector. The first image that appeared on the screen was one of Carol's own emails to the contractor, Frank. The subject line read, "Budget Maximization." "Carol," I said, my voice cutting through her hysterics. Is this your email address? I clicked through the slides. Email after email, invoice after padded invoice. The entire sordid scheme laid bare for all her neighbors to see. The digital paper trail was undeniable. Her face contorted into a mask of pure rage. Her carefully constructed world, her little kingdom of rules and power, was crumbling around her. And she knew exactly who had done it. "You," she screamed, lunging toward me. "You old bastard. I will destroy you. I will ruin you and your whole family." The two deputies stepped forward and grabbed her arms before she could get to me. She thrashed in their grip like a wild animal, her shrieks echoing in the silent room. "Carol Peters," Miller said, his voice flat and cold as he produced a pair of handcuffs. "You and your husband are under arrest for embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and reckless endangerment. Your husband was taken into custody at your home 10 minutes ago." The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the loudest thing I had ever heard. The fight went out of her instantly. Her body went limp, and a look of utter, absolute defeat washed over her face. The tyrant was broken. As the deputies led her out of the clubhouse, she turned and locked eyes with me one last time. Her face was a wreck of tear-streaked makeup and impotent fury. "This isn't over," she hissed, her voice a pathetic whisper. "You haven't heard the last of me." But we both knew she was wrong. It was over. And as the doors swung shut behind her, a spontaneous, cathartic round of applause broke out in the room. My neighbors, one by one, came up to shake my hand, to thank me. George clapped me on the back, his eyes shining with relief. "You did it," he said. "You actually did it." The aftermath was swift and decisive. The other two board members resigned in disgrace the next day. An interim board was appointed, with me reluctantly agreeing to serve as a temporary advisor. Our first act was to hire a real engineering firm to condemn and oversee the emergency stabilization of the retaining wall. It was going to cost a fortune to fix, but at least no one's house would be destroyed. Carol and her husband's case went through the courts. Faced with the mountain of evidence I had assembled, they took a plea deal. They were convicted of multiple felonies. They were ordered to pay over $300,000 in restitution to the HOA. They lost everything. Their house was sold to cover the legal fees and the restitution payments. The last I heard, Carol was serving a 3-year sentence in a state correctional facility. Her reign was officially, and permanently, over. The pines began to heal. The new board, led by a sensible retired teacher, went through the covenants with a fine-toothed comb. They eliminated dozens of the most restrictive and ridiculous rules. The oppressive atmosphere of fear lifted, replaced by a genuine sense of community. People started talking to each other again. The neighborhood Facebook group, now under new management, was filled with pictures of block parties and kids playing, not anonymous accusations. My life returned to the peace I had craved from the beginning. My workshop was once again my sanctuary. The hum of my miniature table saw was no longer a source of anxiety, but a sound of contentment. My unapproved garden gnome, a gift from my granddaughter, now had pride of place by my front steps. Sometimes, when I'm out in the garage, sanding a tiny piece of mahogany for a ship's hull, I reflect on the whole affair. I never wanted a fight. I'm not a hero or a crusader. I'm just a man who wanted to be left alone to build his boats. But when a bully pushes you too far, when they threaten the things you love, you have a choice. You can back down, or you can stand your ground. And if you have to fight, you use the tools you've been given. Carol's weapons were fear, intimidation, and rules she didn't understand. My weapons were patience, documentation, and a lifetime of expertise in the very codes she tried to twist against me. In the end, it was no contest. She built her house of cards on a foundation of lies, and I brought it down with the simple, unyielding force of the truth. It was, in its own way, a matter of structural integrity. The other day, my grandson Tom came into the workshop. He picked up a piece of scrap wood and a small rasp. "Grandpa," he said, his face serious with concentration, "can you teach me how to build something strong? Something that won't ever fall down?" I looked at him, my heart full. I put my hand on his shoulder and smiled. "I can do that," I said. "Let's get to work," and in the quiet peace of my workshop, we did.